back in February of 2011, IBM pitted their computer Watson up against the two top champions in one of the most difficult game shows in the world called Jeopardy! There are different versions around the world. And Watson, as you can see, beat the two top champions in the world at Jeopardy! Using natural language. Now, the computer it took to do that 2.5 years ago was the size of a large room. Today, just 2.5 years later, it's 1/16 of the size of that computer for the exact same computing power, just 2.5 years later. And now, IBM is busy building a computer that's using cognitive systems that can fit in a backpack. So it's actually modeled after the human brain, and it's better for natural language understanding. Now, as a futurist, I wonder what happens when all that computing power can fit in a device the size of our smartphone, something we can just carry with us all the time, having that much computing power with us at all time. And as you can see, it's extremely difficult to think about the future and forecast out into the future. If you look at these quotes here, I think one of my favorite quotes of all time that's wrong about the future is in the bottom there. This is the former CEO of BlackBerry. The iPhone's impact on our business will be minimal. How minimal has the iPhone's impact been on BlackBerry's business? They're currently for sale, and iPhone, as you know, is doing quite well. Apple's doing quite well. But one of the reasons it's so difficult to project out and understand the future, even just a few years out, is that our minds naturally think linearly. So we think things progress at a very linear rate. Things will just change incrementally over time. But technology for decades has been advancing exponentially, where you have things doubling every 12 months, every 18 months. The technologies are just doubling. So the further out you go, the farther reality and the farther your expectations are from reality, because that exponential curve is going higher and higher. And in my research, I think we've actually hit that exponential curve in technology, the knee of the curve there, back in like November of 2011. So you might have noticed that things are changing very quickly now, and it seems like the rate of change isn't self-increasing, so it's getting faster and faster and faster. I think we really started going more up than over on this exponential curve back in about November of 2011. Now let me give you something a little easier to visualize as far as how fast the world is changing. Back in 2005, a new pope was chosen, and they made an announcement on the square about the new pope. And that same thing happened in 2013. So I have pictures from both of those events. I'm going to see if you can spot the difference. Can anybody spot the difference here? These two events. Yeah? Can anybody spot the futurist? I think that's the arm of the futurist right there. That's good. Yeah, one person is way ahead of the curve. So, yeah, so that's a little bit easier to look at. Now, the reason I'm here today as a futurist is not to say this is going to happen in 3 years, or this is going to be for sure what's going to happen. It's to be a catalyst for discussion, to help you recognize how fast the world is changing, and to really start thinking about and talking about these changes now before it's too late. As you saw in that exponential curve, things are changing so quickly, we don't have time to put off and think in 20-year cycles anymore. And to do that, I'm going to talk about a few things. Talk about old school education, talk about 5 trends that are having a huge impact on education, where we are now, where we're headed, and then challenges and opportunities for corporate universities. So, old school. Unfortunately, many classrooms around the world look very much like this today. In fact, I think if this gentleman here was still alive and he was able to visit some classrooms, he probably wouldn't see all that much different, except maybe you'd have to explain what a cell phone was to him. But the way that the class is done would be very similar to what he would be used to. We're actually using an industrial age model in almost all of our universities and schools, where you have a lecture for hours on end. In some places you have semesters, some places you divide up the day differently. Students are learning from paper textbooks with static information. They're memorizing information just long enough so that they can take a test and pass the test, and then they don't have to have that information anymore. They can have an information flush after that. So we're still using this model, even to this day. Now that was great in the industrial age, when you needed industrial age workers, very uniform workers, all doing very uniform jobs in huge factories. We clearly do not need that in today's world. We don't need industrial age workers coming out of our education system. We need people who are creative and innovative, and who can adapt to a quickly changing world, and who can use the tools around them and understand what's important and what's not important. So we've had many supposed revolutions in education. We've had when mail order catalogs first came out, people thought, education's going to change because now people can just order books right to their house. And then when television came out, people thought, education's going to change because now people can just watch things on TV. And then when the VCR came out, people thought, oh, they can just order cassettes for their education. And none of these education revolutions really took off, but I'm convinced today that we are at the beginning of an absolute revolution in education because we have a number of not just emerging trends, but converging trends in education. So let's talk about those 5 trends. Number 1, virtually all information in the world is available online right now. So almost every bit of information is currently online right now. Did you know this year in 2013, in just the next 10 minutes, we will create as much information as it took from the beginning of recorded history until 2003. In 10 minutes. And that was just a decade ago. Also, you look at all the information that's available now is accessible to far more people. So at the end of 2012, we had 2.4 million people, 2.4 billion people out of this roughly 7 billion people on the planet connected to the internet at the end of last year. It's widely expected that by 2020, over 5 billion people will be connected to the internet with access to all of that information that we're creating so quickly. So in the next just over 6 years, we're going to double the number of global voices who are connected to the conversation, who have access to all of this information. And number 3, we have new and increasingly amazing devices that we can use. I mean, the smartphone adoption is very fast, tablet adoption is even faster, and we have even newer devices after that are coming out with technology such as mobile 3.0. Like Google now, for example, is mobile 3.0. It's contextual, so it knows where you are, it knows who you are, what you've been doing, what your friends like, what you like. And for example, with my phone, if I have a flight scheduled, it knows where I am, where the flight is, if the flight's delayed, and what the traffic looks like in between. And it'll automatically pop up on its own, you need to leave in 23 minutes if you want to make your flight. So it's pushing the information to you, you're not having to go access that information. The 4th trend I think is working with educators, changing education, is digital natives. And for those of you who don't know what digital natives are, it's pretty much anyone who was born in the digital age. So roughly anyone about 30 years old or younger, somewhere right around there. So they were born with having cell phones being everywhere, the internet, Wikipedia, and more importantly, they're born having rapid change being the norm. They're very used to things changing very quickly. That's just the norm for them. And the way that they view the world is profoundly different than the previous generations who are digital immigrants. And you look at things, the way that they see things, they are very intolerant of bureaucracy and just saying, well, that's how we've always done things. That's just not an answer for them. You can't say, that's just how we've always done it. They want to find a better way, a faster way. They're completely glued to their devices, as you're all well aware, which is really good for your company, but it always surprises me when you see a group of kids just like this, and they're not talking to anyone. It's like, why did you come hang out together if all you're going to do is just look at your devices? But the thing is, with their completely different view of the world, they're going to be 50% of the workforce by 2020. 50%. And think about this. How many digital natives are in positions of leadership right now? You have your Mark Zuckerbergs and people like that. But maybe 4%, 5% of people in positions of leadership are digital natives with their mindset. What happens when that's 15%, 20%, 30%? How much transition is there going to be? And that very much ties back to education in the way they learn and how they expect to learn. And lastly, just the need for lifelong learning. You can't expect to learn a trade or get a degree and expect to live off that the rest of your life. Technologies or careers and industries are being disrupted constantly now, and you need to always be learning, continually just be progressing in your education. So where are we now? Like I said, I think we're at the beginning of a revolution. And just the beginning of the revolution. Because a lot of major changes have really not hit the institutions yet. And I think one of the things that's the first step in this revolution is MOOCs. And MOOCs have been tried, this massive open online courses. For those of you who don't know, it's basically a course that anyone in the world can take, that universities and other organizations put online. Now, there have been online learning and e-learning tried for decades. In fact, before, we had like MIT actually, they put up a camera in the back of the room and record a lecture, and then that lecture would be available online. a lot of different ways of trying this, but the way that MOOCs are developing is that it's very concept-based. You might have like 3 to 7 minute videos, interactive materials, and so you can make sure you know what you're doing before you move on to the next segment. And if you don't know, you don't have to be embarrassed and ask questions or anything. You can just do it again. And if you already know, you can skip through it and just learn at your own pace. Some of the other advantages that MOOCs have is you're giving access to people, all these new people that have internet connections that were really sheltered from all these new technologies and new information. Now they have access to some of the best professors and best classes in the world. And it's often for free because of different monetization schemes, and also in the beginning there's been universities just experimenting and footing the bill themselves and just paying for it. Another huge advantage is you have some of the best professors and best professionals in the world who are creating these. So you're not getting your information from the 253rd best professor in economics, happening live in front of you. You could be getting it from the worldwide expert who has maybe just created a policy or just changed something that he just invented or she just invented the week before, and now they're already talking about it. You're not looking at a 5-year-old textbook. And another huge advantage is when you have 100,000 students in a class, or in some classes hundreds of thousands of students, if Module 36 has a 98% pass rate and Module 37 has a 20% pass rate, you can very quickly see there's a big problem with this module. What do we do right here and what do we do wrong here? With a traditional classroom, if you have 20 or 50 students, it can take you years to figure out, to get enough valuable feedback to figure out how you need to adapt and how you need to make it more relevant and more actionable for your students. Now, one of the first major MOOCs in this new generation of MOOCs was Intro to Artificial Intelligence. This is Sebastian Thrun. It's a German gentleman that lives in the United States now. He's a professor at Stanford. He's head of Google X projects, or he was. Google Glass was his invention. He worked on the self-driving car. And he had this class, and he decided to put it online. And 160,000 people showed up with no advertising whatsoever. 160,000 people showed up to this class, and I was lucky enough to be one of them. After I took this class, I knew that education would never be the same again because it was so compelling, the format that I was able to learn. I was able to go at my own pace. If I was stuck on something, I could review it. I had classmates. I had 160,000 classmates. So if I'm in Florida and it's 3 in the morning and I'm stuck on something, there's probably someone in Austria who's awake in a group that I can instantly join up with and start talking. Because there's people around the world that are all in these classes. And it was just amazing to work through these different courses with all these people from around the world. Now there are lots of other MOOCs that are popping up. MIT and Harvard have a very successful MOOC called edX that they both put $30 million into. They made a statement that they want to reach 1 billion people with it, and they think it's the biggest revolution in education since the printing press. And this is MIT and Harvard who are saying this, so very prestigious institutions. Coursera says 4.4 million Courserians. That's actually jumped up. It's a little over 5.2 million Courserians right now, just people who take this class. They're adding about 100,000 students every 10 days on Coursera. I've taken some amazing classes in here. I took Surviving Disruptive Technologies, and it was just fantastic because the information was like 3 weeks old, or even in some cases just a few days old. Versus if I couldn't even take a Surviving Disruptive Technologies in a traditional university because it would be too irrelevant. It'd be too far past. And yeah, they're partnering with 84 different, I think it's actually up to 92 different universities now. Almost 500 courses are available for anyone online now there. And one of the big trends with the MOOCs is how they're being used, where now they're flipping the classroom, where you'll go home as a student and you can learn from some of the best professors in the really compelling format, and then you come back to class and you discuss it with your class. So your teacher or professor is the facilitator, so you take the information at home. It's almost like you're flipping your homework and your class experience. And so when you come back, then you talk with your classmates and you discuss it. You still get the interactive nature of it, but you can really learn the information at your own speed since everyone is going at different speeds learning that way. You have a more active learning experience. The next jump where we currently are is adaptive learning platforms. Newton is really pushing the way in adaptive learning platforms. Adaptive learning platforms create courses that are very individualized, very customized, and as you're going through the course, it's adapting to what you know, what you don't know. It's understanding your learning style and partnering with people who would also share either a complementary or a similar learning style. And I read a really good quote that really describes what's so great about adaptive learning platforms, or one of the aspects of it, is sufficiently advanced testing will be indistinguishable from instruction. So sufficiently advanced testing is indistinguishable from instruction. You don't need tests just to quick cram everything for and pass the test, because you know with very fine accuracy what the student knows, where they're struggling, where they need help, who can help them, what other student can help them. And if you have it happening live in the class, they can walk up, the teacher can assist them at that point as well. And University of Arizona is one of the big schools using Newton right now. It's over 40,000 students. They're using it for some of their math classes. They're having some really phenomenal success with it. And it's just, again, this is all just the very beginning. This is where we are right now. So they haven't advanced this adequately, because this is just starting. The next thing is paper textbooks. Excuse me. So paper textbooks, you have maybe 5-year-old information by the time they're able to print it, by the time they get distributed to students. With e-textbooks, it can be continually updated and the price is a lot less. So Google just announced, for example, that on their digital textbooks, they are now renting digital textbooks for 6 months for up to 80% discount. Now I know when I went to school, some of my textbooks were well over $200 each. If you have 6 courses, that adds up very quickly. So if I could rent them for $40 for 6 months and then have them be far more up to date, because they can actively update this digital content instead of just having a dead static textbook that never changes. And Google obviously is a huge company. They're putting a lot of might behind this digital textbook movement. And then also, okay, so let's say I took Sebastian Thrun's class and I learned from, he's the #1 AI expert in the world. So I learned from him. I would arguably have as much knowledge as someone, or probably more, someone who took maybe a more traditional class that way. I go to an employer. How do I tell them, hey, I know this? How do I prove it to them? So credentialing is becoming a big piece of this too, to help push this forward. And we don't have time to talk about all the different credentialing models, but there are ways like Coursera is able to track your typing patterns. It has a camera watching you to verify who you are. So they can certify that you are who you say you are, so they actually give you a certificate to bring to employers. You can pay to go to a proctored exam center. Pearson has 450 centers, or 4,500 centers around the world. Pay $70 or the equivalent, whatever country you're in, and go take a test in front of a proctored examiner, certifying that you took that test, that you know that information. Georgia Tech, the #8 engineering and technology school in the world, now has a master's degree for $7,000 using Udacity, where they're able to track and make sure you are who you say you are. So let's talk about where we're headed in the future of learning. So what are these 5 trends? How are they impacting the near future of education? Like I said, we're not talking 20-year cycles. We're talking in the next, just next couple of years. Where are we headed with that? First, with almost all the world's information online and available to so many more people now, like almost 5 billion people, in the next few years, memorizing facts and, components of training and education, we don't really need to do that anymore because everything is so accessible, especially with digital natives. If you're just trying to get information, you can just ask your device and it'll just tell you instantly. You can just look it up online. So the cloud kind of becomes our digital memory. We're kind of offloading what we have to remember to the cloud, and we're offloading a lot of our decision-making to the cloud as well. Now, when you think about some of the amazing devices that are coming out, I mentioned that earlier, it's not just smartphones and tablets, and Apple's making a big announcement in the next, actually pretty much right now, in California, about new iPads, and who knows what they're going to be introducing. But we're moving to something called, with our new devices, called NUI, or Natural User Interface. So with my phone, for example, I mentioned, I can just tell it things. Instead of having to learn these intricate programming languages, you can just talk to it. You can use gestures, and I don't know if you guys remember the movie Minority Report, and then a lot of the same technologies in Iron Man 3, where he's just, flying things around, and he can just talk to his computers. That technology is already coming out now. We have Leap Wireless. This is Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX and Tesla. He's using that technology. There is now currently available a $70 dongle. You put in your computer, like a USB drive. It gives you this 3D space that has all the points of articulation of your fingers. So he's actually messing around with his, rotating his engines for his SpaceX machine just by using his hands. And some of the new HP laptops are just having that built in. So I think we're going to see that proliferation of that, because that's only $70 today. What's that going to be when, 6 months? So you can just totally naturally interact. And the cool thing with that is that you have this collapsing of this digital disconnect. When you have older digital immigrants who are difficult to using technology, and you have, a 2-year-old playing with an iPad, when you don't have to learn systems and you can just naturally interact with your devices, all of a sudden that digital divide, just the digital disconnect just collapses, because even your great-grandma can just talk to their device and just have it do what they want it to do, just like they would talk to a person. And we have Google Glass, like I mentioned. Sebastian Thrun worked on Google Glass. This is currently available to a few thousand developers. It's open development, so people are just going crazy making learning platforms with Google Glass. There's a cool one called Field Trip. So when you're looking at something, it automatically recognizes what it is, and it can scan and give you as much information as you want about that area. And this is already currently available. Of course, we're going to see that get a lot further. Now the next thing, Oculus Rift. As a futurist, I always do my predictions every year for the following year. I think that Oculus Rift or its next successor are going to be the biggest thing in consumer electronics in the next 12 to 18 months tops. This is a virtual reality device. You wear it, it's like, it's 3D. When you move your head, it moves. It's been tried and failed 100 times. There's all kinds of terrible virtual reality devices. This is revolutionary. It's full view, and it's the latency when you move, it's very minimal. It's just like, it's instant. Show you this picture. This is one of the developers. This is one of the developers' grandmas. And she's not in searing agony as it looks. It looks like she's dying or something, but she is, if you watch this as a YouTube video, she is just like, oh, this is so amazing. This is so amazing. She is just, and she's a grandma, and she can't believe it. Like, she does not want to take it off her head. And this is developing very quickly. You can get the developer model for $300, which are typically developer models are substantially more expensive. This is going to be $100 in probably the next 12 months. People are going to have a very difficult time. If I wanted to visit Vienna and I was back in Florida, I could just put that on and I could be in Vienna again. If I wanted to visit Spain, anything you can do. Video games, it's just incredible. And I think we're going to have a problem with people getting really addicted to this. We have problems with people playing video games and getting addicted. If you think you're there and your mind is thinking you're there, it's going to be a serious societal impact from something like this. So the uses for this kind of thing, obviously they're endless, and there's so many ways you could use that in education. And I certainly recommend that someone, in any business school, any corporate university, even just get a developer device just to see what's available, just with this kind of thing. And of course, we have digital natives. We have digital natives and the way they view the world, and we need to really be thinking about how they view the world and how we can speak better to them and kind of teach on their terms. And so in the near future, I think we're going to kind of go away from the traditional model where everything outside of the school is different for the digital native, except when they walk in the classroom. Then they're living in a whole different world with paper textbooks and just an entirely different environment of something they're not accustomed to. So I think we're going to see that going away. And then we have gamification. So instead of the way that the world is moving right now, it's difficult to make entire degrees, because by the time you graduate, that degree might be completely irrelevant. And you also have people who are getting displaced by technology constantly, and they have a lot of skills and a lot of experience, but they only need maybe just a couple things to get the new job. They don't need to learn everything all over again. They don't need to go back to school, and then maybe not even have a job again, because by the time they graduate, that's now obsolete. They just have some gaps that they have to fill. And so I think we're going to have things like university badges and leveling up. Let's say you're really good in these core areas, but you're a couple levels short in, it could be anything, just in customer-facing interactions or management skills or anything. And you can just fill those gaps through gamification and through resume badging and kind of breaking up the traditional degree. Now, corporate universities are well positioned in many ways, and especially far more than a lot of traditional universities, for this new world of education. But there are certainly going to be some challenges and of course, opportunities that brings with those challenges. Because anytime you have a whole industry that gets completely disrupted, like education is kind of beginning to be, like the publishing industry was previously, like the music industry was previously, like the movie industry is becoming right now, it's very difficult for people already in that space to kind of cope with that. But of course, there are also huge opportunities for people who are thinking about the future and who are thinking about these trends before it's too late, before they're out of business or before they're bankrupt, like what's happening to so many different companies in the private sector, because they weren't thinking about the future. So how can corporate universities take advantage of these trends? And how can they really leverage what they do best to take advantage of these trends and to provide personal development for their employees, also provide development for the company, to increase productivity, to increase profit? So I have some good and bad practices for the future for corporate universities. And I think first, and what's most important, is that we need to unlearn our traditional ideas about education, and about a lot of things, but about education, because the world is changing so quickly, we can no longer stick to the static idea of what education is. We need to unlearn it. You can't move forward until you get rid of the old. You have to clear out the old before you can add in the new. And because we live in a world where we have traditional testing is having decreasing value very quickly, because you can't have people just remembering things long enough to pass, I think we need to adopt adaptive learning platforms and find ways to incorporate these adaptive learning platforms into our instruction. And they're quickly becoming open models where it's not something you have to completely reinvent yourself. These options are out there. And we have to recognize that learning takes place outside the classroom. So it's like this guy is really excited to be outside the classroom and be learning on his own here. So we have to think about ways, how can you, with all these new devices, tracking what people are doing and adapt, interacting with like the field trip app, like popping up and knowing where you are, how can you take advantage of all these learning opportunities that take place outside of the classroom? And instead of thinking of all of our course models have to be created internally, I think that it's very important now, just with how fast things are changing, to explore the wealth of opportunities and the wealth of other materials that can be used outside of what you create internally. So, for example, you could take a MOOC that's already developed and tailor that to your course. So you can have your students take the MOOC and then come back and talk about how that applies to what you're trying to learn, what you're trying to train that employee. So you have this amazing course that's already been created. You can leverage that instead of trying to create all these new courses and just help your students understand how that connects to what you're trying to teach them. And of course, incorporate new devices for instruction. Now, I talked about Oculus Rift being such a huge thing. Think if you can put an Oculus Rift on a new retail employee, and you can basically immerse them in a customer-facing environment where they can experience, everything that could potentially happen in that environment in a very real way before they ever actually have to be there. And that can be applied to so many different areas. So just using these new devices, understanding what's coming out there. And I think corporate universities are very good at figuring out where the gaps are right now. We have a number of openings in this position, but we don't have enough skilled applicants that know these skills. I think corporate universities are pretty good at that right now, but I think the next big thing is to think, with all these trends, what's 2 and 3 years out? What do people need to know? What are they going to have? Where's the gap 2 and 3 years from now? And start creating those courses now to start filling those preemptively before it's too late, before you're having this crush where you can't get enough employees to come in. And we always have to be aware of new trends and think, what jobs are going to be automated? What jobs are going to still even be here in a few years? Like I mentioned, that there's careers and entire industries just being completely obliterated. We have robotics taking tons of factory jobs. This is Baxter, $22,000, and you can just train them by showing them. This is just going in factories all over the world now. It's not just robotics now, though. It's also software. So you have, in the US, you have TurboTax, which has displaced millions of tax professionals because 85% of Americans are just doing their taxes online. And so you have all these people who are going to displace. LegalZoom for attorneys. My fiance's an attorney, and the job market for attorneys it's getting very competitive because of things like LegalZoom. And then with finance, high frequency trading. You go to Wall Street now, and they're missing all kinds of people. There's hardly anyone on the floor anymore because all these computers are just trading with each other. And lastly, I think that for corporate universities, you need to provide learning opportunities for everyone, not just for your elite students, not just for your top performers. If you create online type, I know it's not practical to go teach every single employee all these new and expensive courses, but if you make MOOCs and online learning platforms that anyone can access, even non-employees, that gives you an opportunity to see who is the top performer in this area, and then who's maybe a potential hire, who's going to be moving on to the more expensive courses, who's going to be a candidate for promotion or for just the next level. And Udacity is already doing this. Udacity partners with 350 different companies. Everyone can take their courses for free. These companies are paying Udacity, and then they can come in and they can pick the top 0.01% of performers in that class. And that very, very much makes up their difference in what they're paying. They might pay 10% of that person's salary for the first year just for the ability to do that. But you think about that, you're talking about the very elite of the very elite when you open it up to everyone. So, in closing, I certainly don't expect that I'm going to be 100% right. Obviously as a futurist, like I said, my job is just to be a catalyst for discussion. But I really wanted to get you thinking about the future and thinking about the possibilities that are very real and already have begun and will absolutely have some huge transformations in the next 3 to 5 years at the most. Thank you.